Hey, welcome everyone. I'm excited to have this episode with one of the guests that I've known for years. The topic for today is unpacking innovations in customer success. If you look at customer success today is no longer about just solving problems. It's about when customer calls, it's about building relationship, it's about creating loyalty, it's about helping customers achieve outcomes rather than just serving them, right? So, from the SaaS companies to banking and financial services, we have seen new models emerge that focus on engagement, retention, and advocacy. But not all strategy work. Some ideas look great on paper, but fail in practice, while others quietly transform the entire industries. So, in this conversation, I have the guest who has gone through this transformation, who has led multiple transformation initiative in this space. That's why I have this guest. So we will go deeper into what really drives customer loyalty, where companies get it wrong, and then the creative innovation that are shaping the future of customer success. So, Mike, I want you to introduce yourself, and then we can jump into the topic.
Sounds good. Thank you. Thanks for the invite. Yeah, Mike Shea. I'm based in Minneapolis, Minnesota. I've had a career across multiple industries, and I'd say for all of those experiences, I've had responsibilities for service delivery, and I'd say I've worn the hat formally and informally for kind of client experience leader for the business, and have really always been focused on voice of customer programs and engagement programs, things of that nature. Um, Pumped to be joining today, and I'm currently with a SaaS company called Momentive Software. We provide solutions for nonprofits and associations. We help them run their organizations and help them grow and engage members. And we've got just over close to 20,000 customers.
Yep. Yep. Thank you, Mike. Probably I'll start with something which is close to my heart. I'm in the data space. We deal with reports and dashboards. Um, I'm curious because I want to know. Oftentimes, customer success gets reduced to charts and dashboards and survey scores. But at the end of the day, customers are not numbers, right? You know that very well than anyone else. They are people with expectations, frustrations, and aspirations, right? There's a lot that's going on within customer mind when they call the customer care, when they want to talk to an organization. So, from your perspective, what actually makes a customer feel truly seen, heard, and valued beyond the metrics that we all deal with on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, I think it starts with little things. It's like it's how do you help the client understand that you know them, and it can be as simple as recognizing them as an individual, how long you've had a relationship, maybe how long they've been with their organization, and just little personal snippets. And then to what extent do you know their companies? So I've always
Yep.
kind of used the phrase of it's important for as a provider to be curious and to really be inquisitive when you're interacting with your clients, learn something about them, and
Yeah.
remember it and share it as you're engaging with them.
Yeah, yeah, that is true. And we also know, like I think you might have heard this enough, and I've heard this enough. Like keeping an existing customer is cheaper and more
Yeah.
valuable than acquiring the new one. And yet, some companies have figured this out pretty good. They know how to keep the existing customers exciting, and also they are very good in acquiring new customers. On the other end, some of them are really good at keeping the existing customers, and they struggle to get new customers. We have seen multiple patterns, but oftentimes I've noticed in my experience, we instead of nurturing the existing customers, we always try to chase for the new ones for a reason, right? Everyone wants to get more customers. Everyone look at the ROIs, but why do you think the retention so often takes the backseat, or is it really true, or are we assuming that retention is always taking a backseat versus acquiring new customers?
Well, it always depends, but to me, it kind of gets to your organization model, and companies kind of swing back and forth. Some have hunter farmers, some have separate hunting groups and farming groups. I've probably grown to where I think the retention takes a specialized mindset,
Hmm.
as does new logo. And so therefore, I'd probably approach it with those being, two closely coupled but independent organizations, each with their goals and objectives.
Hmm.
I think on the client success side, I don't think it is, one dimensional just around retention. It's always going to be about, growth and expansion and, cross sell and things of that nature. So I think you have to have these groups that are two very closely coupled groups, but separate teams, separate objectives, given the challenges of each dimension.
Yeah, that's true. Again, we all look at the NPS, the Net Promoter Score for um at least from my perspective, that's what people use as the leading score indicator, and it's been a golden standard for years now, right? More and more leaders are
Right.
questioning nowadays, given the environment that we are in, with the remote culture and AI is evolving at a rapid speed, right? um i I want to know, is that the score that we need to look at, rather than looking at, okay, what do we measure, what do we want to measure truly, right, from a loyalty standpoint, not just satisfaction in the moment, but the kind of engagement that creates
Yeah.
long-term advocacy, right? What is your take on that, Mike?
Yeah. So, I've been working with Net Promoter Score for, 20, 30 years at this point, and I'm definitely an advocate. And the why is because promoters will stay and grow and detractors will shrink and go. That's kind of my phrase that I throw around it. But that said, I don't get too hung up on the score. It's an engagement tool, right? It's a way
Yeah.
to, tell your customers I care and I want to know. And if they respond back and they tell you they love you, great. Then you can reach out and engage them and, talk about, opportunities. Or if they say, hey, I got problems, then you can, it's just a tool. So again, I
Right,
don't
right,
get too hung up on, the score's got to be X, and I call it a love-hate relationship because it's hard to improve. And that's part of the point. I think, I don't want a measurement system that tells me that I'm perfect all the time, because most organizations aren't. And that's another reason why I like NPS, is because it's, detractors will tell you, and I want
yep,
to know it. It's not the only tool, to your point. So
yeah,
you can, in my case, with, software company, you have analytics, which tell you how clients are using your systems. That's an indicator. You can look at support metrics. You can look at other KPIs where, you can evaluate them and say, before they know. So you should engage the client because you see some behaviors that don't make sense. So NPS is really important. For me, it's kind of KPI number one, but it's just a tool to facilitate engagement, and there's other tools and methods that augment it.
yep, yep. Yeah. So oftentimes, Mike, you might have experienced this, and I've seen this in my playbook as well. Oftentimes, we always compare with Amazon, and then sometimes we say, like, we're not Amazon, we're not Microsoft, we're not Meta, right? But what is fascinating to me is how differentially the industries approach customer success. Like an example would be, if I have a product company, the product company lives and dies on adoption, because if the customer doesn't use the
Mhm.
product, they won't renew it, right? But in
Right.
banking or healthcare, um, the service providers, right, the focus is on building trust slowly over the years, right?
Yeah.
But I'm curious to know what lessons these industries can learn from each other, because one end, you have SaaS companies, when the customers don't like it, they won't renew it, and the SaaS company will die, right? Because
Right.
it's all based on adoption. On the other end, you're continuously building the trust. I think there's a synergy that we can bring in, or the learnings that we can share across the industries. I would love to hear your thoughts on how what they can do to learn from each other.
Yeah, I totally agree, because it's like, yeah, there's some products that are, you know, purely consumer products, or there's some that are purely B2B, but there's a lot of instances where, it's blurry in the middle. So I agree. I don't think it's, a narrow, perspective and set of approaches, because in many cases you're behaving like a consumer, even though it might be a B2B capability. And so,
Yes,
how
yes,
do you make sure you're being responsive in your service delivery, kind of day to day, week to week, and then, always having that other eye on, the role of a buyer and the person who makes purchasing decisions, and how do you think about them? And,
Right.
Again, sometimes it's the same person, and you kind of have to keep into perspective, both aspects of it, and not get too stuck on engaging them as a buyer when they're using the product offering, day to day to do what they're doing. So I
Mhm.
agree with you completely. It's not one size fits all, and you can, pick up tips and tricks from a broad range of industries. I've worked in, I think, most of the industries you've mentioned. So I've certainly felt that, through my career, that I can take things that, I would not have thought of carried over, but, to your point, they ultimately do.
Yeah, yeah, that is one. That's 100% true. It's fascinating for me to see and compare. And there's a lot of lessons that they can share and learn from each other. I'm sure a lot of companies have figured this out. I want to go back to the automation and AI part. This is again, we all deal with this customer care, call customer care, or use apps to solve problems. We live in this time where automation and AI is taking and changing at a rapid speed. But at the same time, customers are craving for human connections. I recently did a podcast with Manjit, who's the chair at the University of St. Thomas. He brought in a lot of insights about how the human connections are going to evolve given the AI
Mhm.
space, Mike. But I'm curious because you're in this space. Even I'll tell you my experience. When I call a customer care, it'll give a lot of options, but the only thing that I say to the phone is connect me to customer care, connect me to customer
Right.
care, connect me to operator, right? So that's the only thing I
Exactly.
say because everyone is craving for human connection. So I would like to hear from your perspective because you're living in this space. Given the technology is evolving and human connections, how it is evolving in the customer success journey.
Yeah. And, for all of the environments that, I've been in, they've been multi-channel environments. And, it's kind of easy to say that I want to force customers to go down channel A or channel B because
Mm,
it's lower cost, or, it's generally lower cost. And I've never really bought into that, right? It's like, if I build a channel that has value, they'll use it, right? So if I build a self-serve channel, it's responsive, it's easy to work with, it provides the right answer the first time, and it's low effort, they'll
yeah.
use it. And so, and, in many cases, and, this is how we were thinking about it when we were working together in banking, it's like, you know, those are emotional things.
Mm,
Some transactions are routine, but some, you got to understand the client. And it's like, if I'm having a payment transaction issue and it's an important transaction, I want to speak to somebody because I trust
correct.
people. Right. And I want to talk voice to voice and make sure they understand that my urgency in this situation, or my emotions in this situation, is being heard. Um,
Yep.
and I think that's important, right? So I've never, I've kind of joked around about, oh, voice analytics is going to kill the voice channel. I'm like, no, it's not. It's like, because exactly what you're talking about. I just think that
Yes.
people want to with people based on, the sensitivity or the emotion behind the transaction.
Right, right. That is very true. I
Yeah.
wanted probably that's a good segue because we talked about the automation and AI part. Um, Again, maybe I'm thinking this in a different way. A lot of times I see the customer care representatives, or the call to the customer care will always happen. And I would say in a reactive way, right? When something happens, I pick up my phone and call a customer care. Or when something happens, I get a call from the bank, or I get a call from someone, right? Hey, saying that, you didn't make a payment or something like that, right? So
Yeah.
it feels to
Right.
me it's like always reactive, based on an event that occurred, right? Um, I want to know, like, what is a proactive? Is there a proactive customer
Well,
success or a customer?
yeah, it doesn't have to be, right. And it's like, again,
Yeah.
when you and I work together at the bank, it's like, I remember some discussions early on, and I was working with the business to say, I've got this crazy idea. We should call customers. And it's like, oh, you
Yes.
can't do that, blah, blah, blah.
Yes. Yes.
Well, exactly what you're talking about. We found that if, we could see a transaction event that didn't go well from a client's perspective, and if we reached out to them proactively and had a quick conversation, we proved, kind of A group versus B group, that we reduced a churn by 85%.
Right.
So for me to make, the business to make a five, six, seven, $8, phone call outbound to save that client relationship, it just made a
Mhm.
ton of sense. And,
Right. Right.
that's where I think, you bring together, the analytics capabilities and the automation capabilities where it can be efficient and low effort and two-way engagement. Again, am I being a caretaker for my clients and can I use these technologies to do it efficiently?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. True. Um, I know when I started this conversation, or when we started this conversation, we talked about, okay, it's not always about the data and charts and dashboard, Mike. But when I look at it, right, not all data will tell a story. Probably it might tell like a story where we want to head towards. But there might be an incident, or there might be a scenario where one powerful customer story might have completely changed how the leadership is thinking about this customer success. I'm curious, because you have gone through this journey multiple times. Are there any moments like that, like one customer experience, single customer experience or the story completely changed and influenced the decisions that you made at that point of time?
Yeah, and one comes to mind, and this was it was quite a few years ago, but we were having I call them just broadly system reliability issues, and it was a
Sure.
complex, you know, platform supporting our clients, and there were many different parts of the technology stack end to end, from application to hosting to data to blah 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 blah.
Hmm.
And I was getting feedback from clients about incidents and outages and things of that nature. And, when I was trying to approach it organizationally, I kept on getting feedback of, I'm perfect, but this part of the tech stack is the problem. And I'd go to that area of the tech stack and they'd say, well, I'm perfect. And it's that side of the equation. And I was getting the runaround. I got a voicemail back in the days when we used to leave voicemails. And it was a client saying, I made a commitment to you, your company,
Hmm.
and I just got fired because of these incidents and outages.
Yep.
And I pulled literally 25 people, the mid-level director kind of VP level group together, and I played them that voicemail, and the room was
Hmm.
silent. I was upset. I'm even upset talking about it. And immediately the focus of the organization changed from person to person to group to a holistic view of the client. And so
Hmm.
we quickly, created a end-to-end diagnostic of the environment. Everybody was forthcoming in terms of where were single points and failures and gaps. And then we started remediating them. And, 6 months later, we were much more robust and reliable. So it just took that one story to kind of light the fire, and create a cause for a broader group.
Yeah, I'm sure everyone will be waiting for that one story where they can just put the customer in front of the leaders and say, "This is why we
Yeah.
have to do this," right? Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Which
Um,
is, I've used that kind of many times where it's like bringing a client in and getting a client,
correct,
it's more of a
correct.
B2B environment, client advisory boards and things of that nature where you can do that. And it's awesome. It helps accelerate change.
Right, right. So yeah, so back to the technology part of it, Mike. We are at a phase where personalization, predictive analytics, and AI is rewriting the whole rules of customer engagement. Right? You and I've seen news, and I'm sure you might have seen the news on how everyone is looking at AI to implement it in the customer engagement aspect. But at the same time,
Yeah.
we talked about the human connection. We talked about how people are craving for human connection. The fundamentals of trust and relationships have not changed. So, what is in your mind? Like, what innovations in customer success excite you the most, and where do you see the biggest risks if companies get it wrong?
Yeah. Well, I think in many cases there's so much information that needs to be analyzed and distilled and consolidated and turned into meaningful information. You can do a whole bunch of stuff just to support the client success or the customer support person. So they spend less time, navigating across the multitude of systems and
Yeah.
comparing fragments of information. And, you can put them, to be informed. And so there's just massive waste and productivity you can attack on that
Hmm.
particular, the risks. It's I just find most businesses I work with have
Hmm.
complicated systems with many different technologies, and some of those technologies might be a decade old, some might be 2 decades old, some might be modern, and it's like, how do you do something end to end when it has to cross a lot of these environments, and you may not have the integration layers that make that easy. And then it always gets back to data, right? It's like,
Yeah.
you people propagate data and they don't necessarily have data controls, and so you got a bunch of garbage data, and it makes things what sound easy on the surface and look good on PowerPoint. It makes it really hard to get implemented.
Right. Right. Mike, again, I'm grateful to have you as part of the show. And I was thinking about this topic, and I was like looking at my LinkedIn connection, and then your name popped up, and I was like, okay, there's none other than Mike can talk about this topic, and I'm glad that I have you as part of the show. And thanks for all the good nuggets, and for making it real to share some of those moments and stories, Mike. Thank you so much for being part of the
Well,
show.
yeah, my pleasure. It was fun. Thank you.
Thank you.